In this lesson, we're looking at coloring and shading. There's a few ways you can color and shade your characters. However, the easiest way for me is to create 3 layers. One for the line art, one for the shading, and then one for the color, in that order. So the line art sits on top, the second layer is the shading, and then the third layer is the color. And the reason why I do this is so if I make a mistake in the shading layer, or I've shaded too heavily, I can remove that layer and start again without ruining the line art or the coloring. It also allows me to change colors easily without having to reshade that area. Okay, so let's have a look at these 2 characters in a little bit more detail. On the right hand side of this screen, you'll notice there's the layers editor. And I've made 2 folders, one for boy, one for girl, and put 2 layers inside of that folder for each character. As you can see, this one here is the line art for the boy, and this one is the line art for the girl. Underneath both of those layers is another layer which we will be using to color. Let's click on the line art layer for the girl. I'm going to pick a pink color for the hair, and I'm going to show you what will happen if you draw on the line art layer. You can see here it doesn't work for coloring. So let's select the layer underneath, and you'll notice that the line art layer over the top makes the coloring process 1, a lot easier, 2, a lot neater. And that's pretty much it. What I'm going to do now is go through and color the hair, the skin, the clothing of both characters. And I find the easy way is to go right around the outside of the shape that you're wanting to color, and then simply fill it in from there. You might be thinking right now, why doesn't he just use the paint bucket tool? If I did use that tool and clicked on any area inside of a new layer, it will fill that entire space. So the entire layer would be pink. And that's pretty much why I color in exactly like you would with a paintbrush or a texter. Another way to color would be to use the brush tool to go around the object like I've just done now, and I've filled it in. But instead of filling it in with the paintbrush, I would use the paint bucket tool. But even then, because there is a little bit of blurriness around the edge of the brush, when you use the brush tool and then use the paint bucket tool, the paint bucket tool won't go all the way into the paintbrush area. So you're going to have this little line going all the way around where you've painted. If that doesn't make any sense to you, try drawing a circle with the paintbrush tool and then filling it with the paint bucket. You will notice there will be a tiny little transparent or a white line going right around. At this stage in the coloring process, I'm really just looking at picking colors that suit the characters. These characters have a very young and vibrant feel to them, so I'm picking colors that will match that theme. So just now I've picked a light brown, light orange color for the boy character, which goes with the light pink color of the girl character. And we're using the same skin tone for both characters. And then we'll move on and I will pick a color for his pants. I'm probably thinking a light blue, representing jeans, but nothing too deep and dark because that will not match the rest of the colors. And then maybe a red color, probably the same as the heart for the top. As you're probably noticing by now, this is the fun part for me. I really enjoy taking my time and just going through coloring. It's where the character really starts to come alive, as the saying goes. And on that thought, I think we've pretty much completed the coloring stage and it's time to move on to shading and highlights. So on our layers editor, let's go ahead and click the layer that is below the line art layer, which is the color layer. So I've already selected the boy color layer, if you can see here on the right. So this one here. Let's create a new layer above this one and let's rename that layer shading. So in Sketchbook Pro, I just swipe to the right and it's renamed. So I'm going to make another layer above the color layer in the female character
I'm going to rename that as well to shading. Press OK. And we're ready to go. Okay, so let's pretend that the sun is in the middle of these two characters, just to give you a really rounded overview of the shading process. So I'm going to put it in the middle, so the shading on both characters is going to be different.
When creating a new layer in Photoshop or Sketchbook Pro, or most of the other programs that are out there, you'll find that a new layer is created with 100% opacity. That means if you wanted to make a layer slightly see-through, a little bit transparent, you will need to adjust the opacity level. So what we're going to do is just drag this slider here on this layer to around 20% opacity. That means it'll be 80% transparent. So when we draw on that layer, it'll be a little bit see-through, so you can see the layer underneath coming through to the layer that you're drawing on.
As you can see here on the lower side of the hair and underneath the chin of the female character, I've drawn straight over the top of that color layer because I'm on the shading layer, which is above the color layer. And you can see through that black. That is actually solid black color, but because of the transparency, it looks more like I've changed the color of the underneath layer. So it's a little bit of trickery, but it does the job really, really well. It also helps us later on if we want to make the shading heavier. We can turn up the transparency to 50% and it will make it look like the sun is harsh on that character. Okay, so let's have a quick look at what we've done so far. Because of the position of the sun being at the right of the female character, all of the shading is on the underside to the left of each object that you're wanting to cast a shadow from. So for example, the head of the female character, if you look underneath where the chin is and where the left ear is, casting a shadow on the ponytail, that is all on the bottom left side of that general circle that is the head. So essentially, if the sun is on one side of the character, or your chosen light source is on one side of the character, then the shading must be on the other side underneath any object that you want to have casting a shadow. I tend to try to keep my shading really simple. If you look at the female character, the shading is underneath the hair, it's underneath the chin, it's also just on the top row of teeth from the upper lip, but I don't go into too much detail as far as the shading goes underneath the arms or, you know, on the lower side of the ears. I just find that if you shade the major areas, if you shade the areas that are obvious, then the effect of keeping it simple is still maintained. Okay, so to finish off this lesson, I've added a highlight to the top right hand side of that female character. I'm just going to quickly color in these hair ties in a purple color. I forgot to color it earlier. So the highlights go on the opposite side of where your shading is. So wherever your light source will hit the character first, that's usually where I put a highlight. Adding highlights is a little bit different to adding shading. Highlights sit inside of the object casting a shadow, whereas shading is underneath the object. So for example, the hair has a highlight inside of that orange and the pink area for both characters, and the shading from the hair is on the skin underneath. And there we go. There's the two characters side by side. The good thing about adding your characters inside of a folder in Photoshop or Sketchbook Pro or whatever you're using is that you can move the whole character around, line art, color, shading and all, to wherever you want. You can layer them over the top of each other, assuming that you don't have any transparent layers or layers that aren't completely opaque. I hope that's helped you with shading your own characters. Let's get on with the next lesson.